shells stopped at 10:47 in the morning. Not because the Germans ran out of ammunition, not because the guns broke down.
Immer noch keine Befehle, Feldwebel!
Die Sicht ist zu schlecht. Wir warten.
Verdammt!
But for the third time in as many hours, the artillery had gone silent, and no one on the German side could explain why. It was the autumn of 1942. The Eastern Front was not a single battle. It was a long, grinding wound stretching thousands of miles, where men lived in trenches that smelled of frozen mud and something else they didn't name. Artillery was the language of that war. Not rifles, not tanks. Artillery. Whichever side controlled the guns controlled the ground, and the guns needed eyes. That was the doctrine. Indirect fire meant the howitzer barrel pointed at coordinates on a map. Somewhere forward, within line of sight of the target, a man crouched at an observation post.
Links 200,
He had a radio
kürzer.
or a field telephone or a runner. He watched where the shells landed. He called the correction, left 200, drop 50, fire for effect. Without him, the battery was blind. It could fire, but it couldn't aim. The German forward observers, the Beobachter, were well-trained men. They understood their exposure. They chose elevated positions carefully. Ruins, ridgelines, the upper floors of damaged buildings, hillocks with good sightlines. They knew the Soviets would try to suppress their posts with mortars and counter-battery fire. What they didn't account for, what no one had fully accounted for yet, was that someone out there was not shooting at their positions. Someone was shooting at them. Not the post, the man. The first spotter died before 9 in the morning. A single shot. No one near him heard a muzzle crack. There was no visible smoke, no angle to triangulate, no second round. He simply stopped transmitting. The battery waited. A runner was sent forward. The runner found the observer at his scope face down. The battery waited for a replacement. The replacement arrived 40 minutes later. He lasted less than 20 minutes. This is where the pattern begins to take shape, and where the German command would spend the next 2 hours trying to understand something that the man causing it had already built into his method. The shooter was not targeting the observation post. He was targeting the radio, or more precisely, he was targeting the act of looking. Every time a new observer raised his scope, he was visible for a fraction of a second longer than a man simply standing still. Optics catch light differently. The glint, even in overcast conditions, betrays. A trained set of eyes, far enough away that the shot arrives before the sound, can do arithmetic faster than the target can react. Whoever was doing this had been watching the observation posts before any shells fell. He had mapped the positions the Germans preferred. The ruins at the edge of the village, the second floor of the granary, the boulder outcrop above the riverbank.
Feuer halt! Neue Verbindung herstellen!
He already knew where the replacements would go. By 10 in the morning, the German artillery regiment had lost 3 forward observers. The battery commander ordered a halt in fire missions until communications could be re-established. A 4th observer was dispatched, this time with orders to stay in a position that offered more protection. A concrete reinforced cellar with a narrow aperture. He was instructed not to show himself above the sill. He followed the order. But the aperture faced south, and something about the angle of the masonry, the narrow slit of light, the silhouette of the man's helmet in shadow. Something gave him away. The 4th shot came at 10:31. There's something worth pausing on here. How a single rifleman can paralyze a battery of 12 howitzers. The guns didn't stop because they were hit. They stopped because no one could see for them anymore. The chain of artillery, observer, correction, fire data, guns, is only as strong as its first link. Break the first link repeatedly, fast enough that replacements can't establish themselves, and the chain stops producing results. The guns become noise.
Das Muster ist eindeutig. Sie greifen hier an.
Aber die Stärke der Division?
Sie ist eingekesselt, Herr Oberst. Wir haben keine Reserven mehr.
The German command recognized this by 10:15. Counter-sniper teams were dispatched to the forward area. They were looking for a hide, a prepared position. Loose earth, disturbed vegetation, a spent casing. They found none of those things in the areas they searched. The shooter had not fired from close range. The distances involved, based on the entry trajectories and the time of day, suggested something beyond 1,000 yards in at least 2 of the 4 shots. At that range in those conditions, with no second shot following each kill, the shooter was either operating under a level of patience that most soldiers are not trained to maintain, or there were multiple shooters working in silence. The evidence, such as it was, pointed to one man.
4 Beobachter ausgefallen. Feueraufträge ausgesetzt.
That he was suspending fire missions. 4 observers had been rendered non-functional in under 2 hours. The 5th volunteer had not yet been found. Here's what makes this tactically significant, beyond the body count. By suspending fire missions, the battery had effectively handed the initiative back to the Soviet positions without a single round being fired at the German guns directly. No counter-battery, no airstrike. One rifle, used methodically, had silenced 12 howitzers. This is the math that sniper doctrine was built on. A forward observer in World War II controlled more destructive firepower than any infantry company. A single American or Soviet observer with a radio and a clear sight line could bring down the combined fire of an entire battalion. Dozens of guns, tons of explosives, reaching targets miles behind the front. The observer was not just a man. He was the artillery's nervous system. And the nervous system, once cut, doesn't automatically regrow. If this kind of tactical thinking resonates with you, the way a single decision, a single position, could reshape the arithmetic of a battle, there's a guide we've put together that covers 3 cases like this in full. Documented engagements where precision, patience, and method changed the outcome before the main action even began. You can find it through the link in the description. The counter-sniper teams on the German side never confirmed a location. The terrain worked against them. The Soviet shooter, or team, the record is not definitive on this point, had chosen ground that offered multiple withdrawal routes and no clear focal point for a search. In counter-sniper work, the hunter needs the target to fire again. The target did not fire again. By noon, a German officer had been brought forward to assess the situation. His report, preserved in regimental documents from that period, noted that the battery's observation capability had been systematically neutralized, and that resumption of fire missions would require new observer positions to be selected, prepared under cover of darkness, and not disclosed until ready to transmit. The estimated
We need new observer
delay
positions here and here.
Only established under darkness.
Exactly. They must remain secret until ready to transmit.
that had been under sustained bombardment since dawn. The men in the Soviet positions noticed. They didn't know why the guns had stopped. Some assumed it was a resupply issue. Some assumed the Germans were repositioning. A few veterans who had been under German artillery since Stalingrad simply accepted it without explanation. Because on the Eastern Front, the only pattern you trusted was the one you could feel. What they felt was the ground stopped shaking. There's a version of this story that wants to give it a name. A single man, a confirmed record, a sniper with a hat count, and a homeland. The historical reality is more distributed. Soviet sniper doctrine in the autumn and winter of 1942 specifically instructed snipers to prioritize artillery observation officers and radio telephone operators ahead of almost any other target class. The reason was arithmetic. Doctrine recognized that one trained shooter forward of the Soviet line could degrade the enemy's artillery effectiveness more reliably than equivalent effort aimed at infantry. The guns were not the target. The eyes of the guns were the target. That doctrine was not theoretical. On multiple sectors of the Eastern Front in that period, German after-action reports noted repeated suppression of forward observer teams by what the reports described as highly positioned, long-range fire with no easily identifiable source. The language recurs: no muzzle flash observed, source not located, observer position exposed to fire from undetermined angle.
Look here. It happened again at point 204. 3 men, all headshots.
But no one saw the shooter.
Not individual luck. The method worked because artillery observation in 1942 required a man to be forward, to be looking, and to be alive. 3 conditions. Take one away, and the battery waits. They waited. The howitzers at that position did not resume fire missions until the following evening. In those 24 hours, Soviet infantry units on that sector reported a marked reduction in incoming artillery. The relief was not spoken of in heroic terms. It was noted in a duty log the way a good mechanic notes a repair. Something was broken, something fixed it, operations could continue. The man who fixed it was never confirmed by name in the available records. He was somewhere in the ground, in the long, patient work of it. The calculation of angles, the reading of light, the hours of stillness before a single round was chambered. The Germans looked for him and found evidence only of what he had done. That is the final measure of the method. Not the shot, but the silence that follows it. Not the man, but the pattern he left in the artillery logs of the army trying to put their eyes back together. 24 hours, 4 observers, 12 guns grounded, 1 rifle. Whatever his name was, the Germans were still looking for him when the guns went quiet, and that was exactly where he wanted them. The way war tilts on hidden decisions interests you, the quiet actions that unmake an enemy before he understands what's happening. The guide in the description covers 3 more cases like this, written out in full with the sources behind them. Worth a read before the next episode.